I hope you can hear me. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon from wherever you have joined in. Thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to be here again on the issue of digital IDs. So my name is Claire. I am the moderator. I'm honored to moderate today's session. And even as we get started with our conversation, please invite a friend, invite a brother, invite a sister, invite our parents, invite everyone, because we know that the matters that we are yet to discuss are very pertinent, not only to us as a country, Uganda, to the region, to the generation. Yes, so please invite everyone to be part of the discussion. So today we are here to discuss the issue of digital IDs. Mainly, we want to highlight, if at all, at the end of the day, if we have these digital IDs in place, can they live up to their promise? Around 18th July, we had a discussion still on digital IDs. And at that point, we were introduced to different perspectives. For those of you who are not able to join in, we noticed that this thing is actually taking shape in Kenya, as there is a plan to have some form of chips implanted into babies. We also noticed that it's being rolled out in different countries aside Kenya. But the point was for us to understand, is this going to be contributing on the side of convenience, or to a certain extent there is a form of control? So we are here really to build up on the discussion that we had then. Even as we get into the discussion, we really want to awaken the masses to the realities of these digital IDs, especially the risks that are associated, and also to caution or to kind of like highlight the risks, but also the implications at the end of the day. So on that basis, today I am joined by a group of panelists that I'm going to briefly introduce. I'll request that as I introduce you briefly, you just unmute and say hello so that I'm sure that you can hear me, but also that you have stable internet, and at a later time you'll come in and introduce yourselves. So today I'm joined by Ronald Mark Serunjoji, who is an independent consultant in trade finance. Ronald, you can say hello to us briefly.
Yes, hello everyone. I can hear you loud and clear, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ronald, for joining us. I'm joined by Stefan Semigabo, who is an ICT consultant based in Nairobi, Kenya. Stefan, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Good evening, everyone, from whatever country you're joining us from. It's an honor to be here and to participate in this digital public square. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I'm joined by Dr. Michael Tuwape from Finland. Dr. Michael, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much for hosting us, and I'm glad to be here.
All right. Thank you for being part of the discussion. I'm joined by Bruce Tushabe Nzabanita, who is a human rights advocate. Bruce, can you hear me? Okay. I hope I didn't lose Bruce, but I know he had joined in much earlier. I'm also joined by Mark Nasasira Rubaihayo, who is a theologian and a lawyer at the same time. Mark, can you hear me?
Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. Glad to be here, and I can hear you very well as well.
Thank you for that confirmation. As we get into the discussion, our hashtag is no to digital IDs, and I guess at the end of the discussion, you'll appreciate the hashtag or why we're saying no to digital IDs. Before we get into the discussion, I'll just invite the panelists to introduce themselves in just a space of 2 minutes. I'll start with you, Ronald. Please go ahead. Probably I'll move to the next panelist, Mark Rubaihayo. Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Mark Nasasira Rubaihayo. I'm a theologian. I studied theology, and I'm also a lawyer. I am very much interested in rights and liberties, the protection of liberties, and of course that speaks so much into the freedoms of the people. When we are faced with some of these things and the new phenomena that comes on board, then we put it under the lens of the liberties and the freedoms of the people, but also like I said, being a theologian, we also look at it in that angle. So that's what I do. I am also a bit of media commentator on different issues in that regard. So I appear on different media platforms, print media, and of course, radio and television. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Mark. So Mark will be discussing from the perspective of theology and law. I'll invite Dr. Michael to introduce himself.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Michael Twape. I'm a software engineer, a researcher, and a reader. I work at the University of Lappeenranta-Lahti, University of Technology in Finland. And I come from Uganda. I'm not a white man. Every time I come to Uganda and you are going away, people accuse us who live in Europe for being supporters of imperialists, homosexuals, and the rest of the like. I am not one. I'm not homosexual. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael. So Dr. Michael will be discussing from the software engineering research perspective. I'll invite Ronald Mark to introduce himself. Ronald? Okay, I still cannot get Ronald. Probably the admin can help me to check in on him. I'll invite Stefan to introduce himself. Stefan, you are muted in case you're speaking. Okay, so I can see Ronald is joined in as a listener. Probably I'll just introduce him as he transitions to being a speaker. So Ronald is an independent consultant in trade finance with a wealth of experience in banking, finance, and customer relationship management within the banking sector and government. He has a strong passion for financial management, for risk management, for capacity building, analysis of data, and special focus in financial modeling and analysis. Ronald Mark will be discussing from the banking experience. Thank you, Ronald Mark, for joining us. Then I'll go ahead and introduce Stefan Semigabo. I can see you've also joined in as a listener. Please transition to a speaker. So Stefan is a distinguished ICT consultant and tech thought leader. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya, and he has expertise in the technology sector with various degrees. So Stefan will be discussing from the IT perspective. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us on this issue of digital IDs. As we get into the conversation, our hashtag is No to Digital IDs. I'll just give my speakers a minute to make sure that they are all joining in as speakers. All right. As we get started into this conversation of can they live up to their promise, and I know various promises have been presented or various advantages have been presented around the use of digital IDs, things to do with improvement of service delivery, things to do with inclusion, some form of financial inclusion, things to do with convenience, things to do with accessibility. But even before we go into depth in this conversation, I'll just invite Stefan to first of all highlight what are digital IDs. Some of us might have an idea of what digital IDs are, or probably might have an idea of a form of digital IDs, but we do not have a clear linkage, or we cannot link it directly to digital IDs.
Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity for me to start off highlighting what digital IDs are. So to start with, to give context to the discussion, I'll attempt to give a context of what digital IDs are from a general point of view. So digital IDs are the online representation of an entity or of an individual, and are the foundational element of the interconnectedness or the internet of things in a digital world is the underlying principle of the digital identity. So it encompasses a wide range of data from the simplest forms of, let's say, usernames and passwords to more advanced identification using biometric data, and to what now is growing into what is being termed as digital twins or a digital double. So the identification online basically labors to identify what you have. That is a password, personal identification, maiden names or security, answers to security questions. Or the second option, it can be what you are. That is the possession of unique keys or badges or cards. So that's something that you have, or what you are. And that is the most secure form of digital identification, which is biometric information. And this is where we draw the line in terms of privacy and data. And we'll be getting into more discussion on that because it entails things like fingerprints, facial scans, iris recognition, etc. So the digital identity in the context of today's discussion goes beyond national IDs, to be very clear, because that is a facet of e-government. So it goes into areas of digital identity in terms of devices, tying in entities, devices, people, and things. So the form of identification, the entities, people, and devices, and IoT to identify. And this has different use cases in areas of healthcare, financial services, telecommunications, e-government, e-commerce, and travel. So with that said, I would like to drill down a little bit in that area of e-governance where the relevance of the discussion of.
I think we lost Stefan, but I know he had made mention of what digital IDs are and also what we are delving in today. So from what he shared, I would like to now get into the discussion, and I'll start off from the finance perspective or from the finance side. So there has been a lot of push around central bank digital currency. We've seen this especially in foreign countries, say the Bank for International Settlements, the People's Bank for China, the European Central Bank. There has been a push around us having that form of integration of a central bank digital currency. And all this has been presented on the promise that it's going to revolutionize our economy. In a way, we are going to have a greater financial inclusion, in a way that the systems will be efficient, in a way that it is secure. And Ronald, I would like you to share with us, do you think we should be excited about this kind of transformation, or do you think there are some form of hidden risks that we need to know about and also consider on the other hand?
Okay, now I will just dive right in. The central bank digital currencies, I would give it the layman terminology, is what central banks or governments are trying to do to outdo what we are seeing like Bitcoin. You see, Bitcoin is not centralized. So what the central bank digital currency will be your local government or your central government of the country coming up with a digital coin and it having control, over transactions with that digital particular coin, compared to what you see with blockchain technology that is decentralized. So I am totally against central banks coming up with a digital currency, and I'll start from the point of monitoring and control. So once a central bank comes up with a digital currency, there is a high chance of transaction tracking, and I will call them CBDCs. They are designed to record every single transaction in a centralized ledger, allowing governments to monitor all your financial activities in real time. So you have nowhere to hide. Each and everything that you are doing, as long as it informs any form of payment, you have the big brother view. Then I also have another point, which is programmable money, where governments, in creating such an environment, they are going to be able to restrict how you're able to spend your money. So assuming they do not desire of you to make a purchase of something, they will just deny you access to the platform or to the coin. The other I see as something that we need to look out for is direct intervention. So central banks could potentially freeze accounts or reverse transactions if they suspect any illegal activity or something they do not feel comfortable about. This will be a level of control that is so possible, yet at the current state where we are using cash, it is totally impossible. The other concern that we need to look at, initially I said monitoring and control. Now let us go to something dealing with privacy And with privacy, there's going to be a lot of surveillance. There's going to be a lot of data security. There's going to be a lot of misuse of that particular data. And all this can be seen with the particular coins that within the world. We have the China's digital yen. And Nigeria is trying to come up with the e-naira. The European Union is also trying to come up with a digital euro. So all these are, in essence, giving government a lot of power to look into, 1, your financial status, 2, your financial activity, and 3, they will curtail any form of prosperity or growth to individuals that they do not feel comfortable about. You can only imagine if government has power to limit expenditure of the opposition because it controls the flow and the source of finances for them. The other that I would want to look at is, what are the potential risks arising from centralization of financial data, and what strategies can be employed to safeguard these systems against cyber attacks? Anything that deals with digital, online, it is subject to cyber threats. So the first potential risk that we're going to be seeing is a data breach. With centralized systems, they can become prime targets to cyber criminals. A successful breach can expose vast amounts of sensitive information, and this can be seen in 2017. Equifax, a major credit reporting agency, suffered a massive data breach that exposed people's financial information. Another potential risk that we can also look at is unauthorized access. This is when someone that is not allowed to have access to certain information has access to it. This can also be seen in the 2019, remember Capital One experienced also a data breach where a hacker gained unauthorized access to over 100 million customer accounts and credit card applications. Now, we can only imagine if that particular breach is localized, how people can trade such information and they can easily sell it to the highest bidder. The other that we'll be looking at is having a single point of failure. Centralized systems can be vulnerable to disruptions. If a central system fails, it can lead to significant downtime and data loss. My other point would be on privacy violations, which I think I've hinted on, where centralized data storage can lead to privacy concerns, especially if data is not properly encrypted. Facebook faced such a challenge in 2019, and that scandal led to a lot of information being put out into the public. Now, those are some of the potential risks. So what are the strategies that can be put in place to ensure that such doesn't happen? So we can have strengthened access and controls. We can have data encryption. We can have regular software updates. We can have employee training and awareness. We can have backup and disaster recovery planning. And I've seen a lot of this in the banking sector, where people do ensure that once one system is attacked, they can easily use another server to be able to serve a clientele. They should also be able to conduct security audits and assessments to look out for the vulnerabilities within the system. Also, information sharing and best industry practice. It helps to be able to beef up security. The other point that I'll be touching on is, in what ways might direct control of money supply and transactions by central banks lead to potential overreach in the monetary policy? Now, direct control of money supply and transactions by central banks, especially through mechanisms like the central bank digital currencies, can lead to potential overreach in monetary policy. In what way? 1, there's going to be increased surveillance and privacy concerns. This means that the central banks could monitor all transactions arising from significant privacy issues that I've mentioned. Concentration of power, where central banks could gain excessive control over the financial system, potentially leading to decisions that prioritize monetary stability over other economic goals, such as growth or employment. There could be also an impact on the commercial banks, whereby by offering the central bank digital currency directly to the public, central banks might reduce the role of the commercial banks. This will lead to concentration of financial power and possibly higher interest rates as banks compete for deposits, because people will be dealing directly with the central bank. There is also something to do with policy implementation and risks, There is also financial stability risks, which you can say that in times of crisis, people might rapidly convert all their bank deposits into a digital currency, leading to sudden outflow of funds from the central bank, and that will destabilize the financial system. In simple terms, in banking, they call it giving a run on the bank, whereby certain information moves into the public and everyone wants to withdraw their cash. So we are looking at a scenario where people just want to convert all their cash into a digital currency. That will most definitely bring a financial instability. And we have examples where we have seen in Zimbabwe, there was hyperinflation in the 2000s, where the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe printed excessive amounts of cash to finance government spending, and this led to hyperinflation. We also have the European Central Bank and its negative interest rate. That was after the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. The European Union implemented negative interest rate to stimulate the economy. While this was totally aimed to encourage lending and investment, it also led to unintended consequences, and it squeezed a lot of profitability out of most banks. An example of India and also in the US. What happened in India, government gave a directive where they decided to demonetize high denomination currencies, and all these notes were recalled, and this was just to curb the black market and counterfeit currency. What this led to was a shaking of mostly the small businesses and the daily wage earners, and it led to a withdrawal of close to 86% of the currency within circulation. So you can only imagine if government comes up with a digital currency and everyone is running to exchange, what it will do to the people in the villages who are not tech savvy and the people that are not banked or bankable. I would also want to move to, in what ways could advancement in technology such as automation and AI, how can it disrupt job markets and the economic structures? Any advancement in technology is something that is really, really good, but it also poses certain, I would call them, risks in the market. There would always be job displacement and there will always be job creation if we are to advance technology or AI. Automation and AI can perform tasks traditionally done by humans, leading to job losses in certain sectors. For example, in manufacturing and service industries, we are seeing increased use of robots and AI systems. An example of that is Amazon, where they did lay off so many workers and they employed robots to be able to help in the packaging and delivery of packages. We also have changes in jobs and nature. There is task transformation. Actually, many jobs will not disappear, but they will change in nature. Workers will need to adapt to new tools and processes, often working along AI systems that handle routine tasks. Then, in terms of skills shift, there will also be a growing demand of skills in technology, critical thinking, and complex problem solving. How then does this all come to affect the economics of the country? There is productivity gains and economic disruption. So in productivity gains, we have automation and AI can significantly boost productivity, leading to economic growth. Businesses can produce more with less, potentially lowering the costs and increasing the profits. And an example of that is where we see AI and technology in agriculture. We see it in the legal field, we see it in healthcare, and we see it in retail. In agriculture, we see AI is being used in precision farming to analyze soil data, optimize crop yields, and reduce on manual labor. In the legal field, anything to do with reviewing of documentation, legal research, and accuracy, which reduces the need for paralegals and junior lawyers. In healthcare, we are seeing it where it's being used in diagnosis to analyze medical images, and all this improves accuracy and also increases the speed, but reduces the need for certain medical professionals. In retail, we are seeing it in inventory management, We are seeing it in automated checkout systems. And all these are becoming so common that it's reducing the need for human workers in certain roles. So how is economic disruption, how is it going to intensify the socio-economic inequalities? Because we are seeing a lot of introduction of AI, we are seeing a lot of introduction of automated systems. How is this going to lead to socio-economic inequalities? There's going to be a lot of job loss and unemployment. An example that we saw was during COVID, many service jobs were lost, hitting low-wage workers the hardest. We're going to see a lot of wage stagnation where there's not going to be an increase, and this gap will continue widening as the high-income individuals may still see a wage growth, while the low-income earners will either remain there or they will be cut out. We're also going to see a reduction in access to resources. We're going to see a lot of wealth inequality. And this too was seen also during the pandemic, where the wealthy continued to increase in wealth, while others struggled to keep up within the pandemic. We're also going to see a lot of government policies change. The response to economic disruptions can also lead to inequalities where policies that favor large corporates or the wealthy, such as the tax cuts, bailouts, can increase the wealth gap. The tax cuts and the bailouts can also be seen in this nation where some companies have received different fundings from government, maybe because they did export to our neighbors in South Sudan. Others are struggling within the construction industry and they're receiving bailouts from government. So if this is happening currently, you can only imagine what will happen when we automate a lot of things. I would then touch my last point, which is what are the potential risks that arise from the use of digital IDs in creating social credit systems that control and influence individual behavior. Like Stephen said that anything that is digital, there is no privacy. That would be my first point. There is going to be a lot of privacy invasion because digital IDs can lead to extensive data collection, which might be used to monitor and control individual behavior. This can inherently result into significant invasion of privacy if not properly regulated. There's also going to be a lot of surveillance and control, like I initially said. There's going to be a lot of discrimination and exclusion, whereby they're going to say those without access to digital IDs or the internet may be excluded from essential services. And we did see this at a smaller scale during the pandemic, where certain services or certain people were categorized as non-essential. You can only imagine what would happen if everyone is supposed to go digital and there are certain classes or group of people that have no access to digital IDs or have no access to the internet to be able to subscribe to this particular agenda or narrative. There's going to be also data security risks where inadequate security measures can result in data breaches, exposing sensitive personal information to misuse by malicious actors. There's also going to be misuse of data. This is a risk where the data that has been collected from your digital ID could be misused for purposes of anything that is intended by whoever has access to it. It can be commercially exploited or politically manipulated. Some of the examples that we do have with the digital IDs, we have the China social credit system, we have the Estonia's EID, and also Canada's My Butter, the digital ID. So all in all, if I'm to summarize my presentation, the central bank digital currency and digital IDs work hand in hand. There is no way government can set up a digital currency without pushing for a digital ID because they would want to have visibility for every single account holder. And it can be seen even in our local banks currently, whereby if you are a national, you're supposed to present your national ID to have access to financial systems if you're to go to a commercial bank, which is not the case for, let me say, mobile money or all the others. And would all understand that the biggest percentage of the country's population is not banked. Not banked, I would mean they do not hold accounts in a commercial bank. And we have seen what mobile money has done to bring forth financial inclusion. Let us say government moves ahead to push for the central bank digital currency. I would say only a small portion of the population of Uganda would have access to this digital currency. Because one, the biggest percentage is unbankable. The biggest percentage is not exposed to technology. The biggest percentage has no access to internet. So it would lead to an economic disruption, and it would widen the inequalities, and it would widen the wealth gap. I stand to say that government should go slow on implementing digital IDs and digital currency for this nation, because it has more harm than good, and it will leave a lot of people exposed, and it will all be at the mercy of who is in power to have a living. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for sharing in depth. So I want to bring in Mr. Nzabanita very quickly, and Bruce, I hope you can hear me. I hadn't introduced you much earlier, but a brief introduction of Bruce. He's a human rights advocate, and he specializes a lot in anti-corruption and legal protection. So I want to bring you in from the submission that we've had around central bank digital currency. And we know that this is presented on the promise of financial inclusion, but from the submissions that we've had, we've seen that actually there will be a form of digital divide at the end of the day, various socioeconomic inequalities, restrictions in how much you can spend or how much you can withdraw. And also, on the other hand, there are a lot of issues around privacy. So I wanted to get your submission on what is your take from the sharing much earlier.
Tushabe Bruce Nzabanita, a human rights advocate with experience of spanning to over 10 years in the matter of human rights. I'm pleased to be given audience on the platform to share my mind on the debate. As we all know, Ugandans have over time to come up with good proposals, though with little or no research at all. The key points to note: exclusion and poverty. By itself, exclusion is troubling enough, as millions of people, as millions of Ugandans will be shut out of the digital ID system, a key source of official identity. To make matters worse, individuals must prove their identity through this poorly calculated system before they can access health care, social security, and other services. The Legislations of Persons Act of 2015, underpinning the national ID system, codified integration. Institutions providing public services are now required to request either a national ID number or a national ID card. Combined with the problem of mass exclusion, this overly ambitious agenda of the integration of the national ID has led to a catalog of harms. Thousands of older persons have been excluded from a key social protection program aimed at elevating poverty, the senior citizens grant. As a result, they are denied access to what is often their only source of income and skill, and risk falling even deeper into extreme poverty. Currently, there have been numerous accounts of women and children who look for national ID being chased away from the health centers at times when they are in need of medical care. Digitalizing the national ID system will be a barrier of accessing life-saving service for the same of the most vulnerable who are unable to negotiate the administrative, legal, technical, and financial hurdles imposed by NIRA. In Jamaica, for instance, the Supreme Court found that a proposed digital ID system was unconstitutional on the grounds that mandatory registration in the program, which collected extensive geographic and biometric information, violated the right to privacy. What makes the matter worse in Uganda, especially, is both on extensive record of harms and a central focus on using economic and social rights to remain in a digital ID system under numerous human rights treaties to which Uganda is bound. The government has a strong positive obligations to provide equitable access to essential services, as well as strong negative obligations against introducing measures and introducing discriminatory barriers. The Ugandan High Court has already accepted an amicus briefing from former UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and the human rights, which lays out the extremely heavy burden that must be placed on the government to justify its action in addressing barriers to access. Given Uganda's government frank acknowledgement of its struggles to make the digital ID system work, it will be difficult to provide an acceptable justification for well-documented harms and ongoing damage to the health care and social protection system. And I would like to confirm that the digital ID this system is unconstitutional. The violation of human rights, the violation a right to information, that is Article 41, unlawful collection and storage of personal data, Article 27, infringement on the rights of freedom of movement, Article 28, discrimination against marginalized groups, Article 21, failure to protect vulnerable populations, Article 35, unconstitutional delegation of powers, Article 40, infringement on the rights of fair hearing, Article 28. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for that submission. So it's clear that it's no to digital IDs, and that's our hashtag for this conversation. So as we move ahead, the first speaker highlighted a threat, and he mentioned something to do with what happens if at all we have some form of a single point of failure. And it's interesting that we actually had this incident last month on the 19th of July, for those of us who are aware. But for those of us who are not, it so happened that we had a global tech outage on Microsoft. And at the end of the day, we noticed that various services or sectors were affected: banking sectors, aviation sectors, transport sectors. So people were stuck. And from that, I want to bring in Stefan. Given all these vulnerabilities, the question is, how secure are these digital IDs? Should our governments really push for mass rollout of these digital IDs from that incident? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Maybe kind of, like a joke, the fact that I'm going to talk about tech outages, and a couple of minutes ago I was unable to access the Twitter service. So I'll start from the point of digital infrastructure, how critical is it, and what are its frailties. So starting from the most recent failure that we had, that was the Microsoft outage, which was caused by an update that was pushed by their security services provider called Crowdsource. This caused major outages and brought down global infrastructure and services in areas of transportation, in areas of financial services, in areas of healthcare. So, for instance, in healthcare, patients were unable to access their patient records. There was a disruption in provision and communication of the medical procedures, timely communication of medical procedures that were supposed to be undertaken, and the communication itself between healthcare professionals and their patients. So it was significant, and it showed how technology is also susceptible to failure. And it is not the only one. The recent outage is not the only one. there is a good case study of different and notable outages that have happened. Case in point, even the platform we are using itself, Twitter, in 2019, they had an outage for almost an hour, and this brought down all, in terms of access to latest news and communication for the users of the service. For the sponsors and people who do commercial and do advertise on this platform also had financial losses. So from the financial point of view, you also look at how any outage can bring down and bring to a standstill in terms of transactions, in terms of business, in terms of e-commerce. So there is a lot that the digital IDs are supporting, that digital ID as a facet of technology, once it fails, for instance, if you need to log into your maybe internet banking account and somehow the authentication services failing, or in terms of maybe it's a digital certificate company that is supposed to issue and certify that you're the right person who's accessing an online service, and their system fails, there's going to be serious repercussions for that. So I will run through some of the causes of for instance, global outages. Some are infrastructure failures, some are cyber attacks. The most recent one we saw was when Elon Musk was hosting the presidential candidate, President Donald Trump. There was a distributed denial of service attack on Twitter servers for a sustained period, which delayed the whole start of the X space. And these kind of cyber attacks can be targeted, can be from bad actors. They could be in different forms. There could be ransomware attacks. They could be just to cause a system failure. So they could be having some financial motivations. They could be having political motivations, and they can take on different facets. The other causes are like software bugs and updates, like the recent scenario where CrowdSource pushed an update to all Microsoft systems, and they all ended up having major failures. And it took time for them to recover, for different systems in travel, in healthcare, to be reinstated into terms of operations. Other failures can be caused by human error. They can be caused by natural disasters. So we can basically assess and look at the digital world or the technology world, and you can clearly see that it is not a system that is not prone to failures. And so where does that leave an ordinary person who is relying on such systems for their healthcare, their financial services, in terms of if it's a data breach, like the previous speaker talked about the Capital One hack, where credit card information was stolen. So you can look at the sensitivity of these systems, and then you also now have to weigh it against what is being put out as it's all, merry and roses. Of course, there's very little emphasis that is brought forward to highlight the risks that are involved. And it is within such discussions and platforms that we get to assess the bearing of how impactful is this to a person's privacy, a person's access to critical services. How is it critical to a person's well-being in terms of their finances? You can imagine how that bears on a person who has had life savings in a certain maybe account. And so because of a data breach, and there was a lot of sensitive information that is stolen during that data breach, all of a sudden they cannot access their livelihood. You can look at travel. When Microsoft systems outage, when they failed, it didn't just affect only the travel in terms of booking and travel schedules. But if these systems are the underlying systems that are running most of the automated controls, and where we're moving with AI, you'll see a lot of exclusion of human decision making and trusting artificial intelligence to make decisions. So there is a lot of sensitivity there. Perhaps to finalize, I want to highlight a more recent data breach that happened in the US. Actually, mainstream media did not report this. You can search it online. I got it off a security information cybersecurity forum called Krebs on Security, and it's regarding to the national voter information in the US. Now, this is a very critical season for the United States, given that they're heading into elections, and then there's a data breach involving National Public Data. And National Public Data is a company that is a data broker. It aggregates public records, including voter information. So you can see the sensitivity. And some of this information, in my own understanding, I would classify it as critical information. But the legal regiments, the governments, and then the commercial interests of them getting information, they do not really dwell on the sensitivity of the data. They just want to capture as much data. They want to, to be able to skim and get as much data from an individual for whatever motivations as highlighted from the previous speakers. And that is where technology becomes now frail, because it should be by design that you only capture relevant information, as highlighted earlier. The personal identifiable information should be basic information to identify a person: their name, address, age, or date of birth, something like that. But when you go to the extent of capturing iris, fingerprints, and all DNA information in your protected health information, GPS coordinates of someone's location, now that is of privacy, it's not secure by design, and it poses a lot of challenges that we're here to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I would like to bring in Dr. Michael, especially on the first submission that you made around technology being susceptible to failure. So I know in regards to computer security, the things that security specialists pay attention to are things to do with confidentiality, integrity, and availability of these systems or whichever services that are run or that are available on those networks. But it's interesting that software update or a security update was made when the services were in use. And at the end of the day, I'm referring to that global tech outage. And at the end of the day, we noticed that this tampered with the availability of the system. So, Dr. Mike, I wanted you to share your perspective as a software engineer, practitioner, researcher. Do you really think our governments should go ahead and implement these digital IDs in our everyday lives? From the previous speakers, the submissions that have been made, but also from your perspective.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, and thank you again for hosting us. Like most of the other speakers have said, there is a lot to be desired as far as implementation of some of these technologies are concerned. But specific to your question, software technologies are just like any other technology. There are so many things that you need to put right before you get onto implementation of certain technologies. And sometimes, most importantly, the legal regime is supposed to be ahead of the technology, which unfortunately it is not. I would give you an example. In Europe, many countries in Europe, I would give you specific examples in Finland, Sweden, and Estonia, where they have managed to implement digital identity. And digital identity is implemented under law, and this law also is very strong on issues to do with trust, protecting the trust of the people on whatever system is supposed to be implemented, because without the people's trust, everything goes down. For example, the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, which governs the whole of Europe, is very, very, very particular on every technology that you put in place in regards to privacy of personal data. And also, another thing which is there is that you do not implement a technology which is supposed to touch everybody and then implement it in a manner that it becomes exclusive. For example, having digital ID where some people do not have access to the infrastructure makes it very, very wanting, because it becomes difficult for someone who comes from my village in Pakwach to get access to healthcare if he has to identify himself with his digital ID at the hospital, he has to be digitally identified at the hospital where there will be no internet. You need not to pay for such a service, for example. It should be free. I will liken it with our national identity system in Uganda, where I think people pay for it.
Very
People
correct.
pay for it. Now,
For replacement.
you pay for replacements and all those types of things. And also, there is an expiry date to your national ID, which I think should not be the case. Because using such systems, you cannot access the bank, you cannot access any kind of service at all. In Europe, for example, at birth, you are given an ID system which is not biometric. Of course, they capture biometric information about you, but for purposes of identity, it's just a digital ID, not related to your biometrics. Now, it has your date of birth and has certain other figures which are assigned depending on certain particulars about you, but you cannot access a bank, you cannot access anything without that. If you're a guest, you will have certain things which you can do, but then the other things which are inherent to people who live, like, for example, accessing bank services and the rest, become very, very difficult. So such things make it very, very difficult. Now, where do we go as Uganda? Besides technology being wanting to the whole world, in Uganda, we are far behind. I would give you a little statistics on some of the internet penetration, for example, in Uganda is at 27%. In the whole of East Africa, I think Kenya is doing relatively better than all the others to 40%. Of course, the mobile penetration is better, that all these places, averagely, we have about 97% of mobile coverage, the lowest being in South Sudan in the whole of East Africa. And then when we go to 4G, because the moment we decide to go digital to that extent, we may need to have very reliable internet. You may all notice, I'll give you an example, that things like driverless cars are not new phenomenon. Even advances in AI are not new. They are things which were started 50 years ago. But then, because we do not have good infrastructure, all the research and every advancement in those technologies were put aside until they went into the development of 5G, the development of 6G right now. Now, in the whole of East Africa, Uganda stands at 35% in 4G access. That is just 4G, and zero completely in 5G. Now, some of these things we are talking about, for you to have effective access to digital services, you need very, very reliable internet. We cannot manage to host the Twitter space successfully without interruptions. Then how can we manage to do those other things successfully? So all this brings in a lot of exclusion, which is a problem, and of course to the poor people, which I think is a bit difficult. But then the whole point is that despite all this, there's no good technology as yet. The infrastructure is not supporting all these things, but government can go ahead and implement them. What does it leave me and you as citizens of a country? I think the best to do is to prepare ourselves to brace the occasion instead of saying no, because I think we may not have the capacity to say no, but prepare our... As soon as I said that we do not have proper infrastructure, everything went off. It's so unfortunate. It has interrupted with everything. Can I continue, or we wait for other people to join back?
You could go ahead.
Okay. It's a pity. But anyhow, I was saying that the most important thing we need to do as citizens and activists, we need to weigh our strengths. And I think the best is to accept technology, and in the process of accepting it, prepare ourselves and the space to be civically resilient, to tell government what we would want with our data, that if there is any breach, we have laws in place to handle such situations, and government should equally prepare itself such that if there is any outage or anything, they should be resilient enough to turn into an alternative system and work with it as soon as possible. As unfortunately, even in the very advanced world, technology has become a mess. I particularly research on software, such failures, and I'm telling you that failure in software is a very, very, very big thing. And I don't see it ending soon, because software is designed by humans for humans, and we make so many mistakes in the process of doing things. The thinking that AI is going to take over the development of software is not absolute. AI cannot take over everything. There are certain aspects which will be done by AI, but we do not yet have significant evidence that there would be better efficiency with the advent of AI, especially in delivering technology. Now, like I said, most of the issues raised are about trust. We need to empower our society and also protect the unempowered people. For example, Digital Agenda, make yourself legal, and if there are any cases which need redress, Digital Agenda on behalf of the population can go to court. Digital Agenda should start undertaking studies with the population for us to understand what the people think about the use of such technologies. All stakeholders should be put on board, not just the users of the technology, but even the people who are on the other side to enforce. For example, law enforcement. Are the courts ready to settle challenges of breaches by our governments? Because I am very sure our governments are not going to let this go. They will be the first abusers of whatever infrastructure they put in place for digital identity. So I would think it's important we start preparing our people. I think there is funding available to sensitize the population and also do some kind of training in that respect. I saw yesterday there is an organization in Uganda, Action Aid Uganda, has started doing sensitization on digitalization in that respect. But I would think there is also need for skilling most parts of the population to be champions of advocacy for respect of the rule of law in the process of digitalization. And we should strengthen the population to be able to say no where something is wrong. I hope that puts us to a point where we can think of a way forward and how best to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael, for that submission. And I'll just get back to one of the key risks that were mentioned much earlier around the use of digital IDs, something to do with concentration of power in the hands of specific people or a specific group of people. So drawing this from the Bible perspective, there is a story or a writing around the Tower of Babel, and it so happened that there was an attempt around building a tower that would reach heaven, something of the sort. And the point here, or the point I'm trying to put up here, is that from this example, we see that if we have some form of centralized control, it can be problematic. And I want to bring in Mark Nasasira on that basis, that based on that biblical example, but also some form of modern concerns around data misuse, around surveillance, those different elements that have been mentioned. What is your point around would these, at the end of the day, lead to some form of efficient governance, or at the end of the day, are we risking too much? And so at the end of the day, we are sort of like pushing control or power in the hands of a specific group of people. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Before I even talk about digital IDs and central bank digital currency, we need to understand what authority power, what it means when we talk about holding power or governments being in power. It is the ability of government to compel citizens or people within its jurisdiction to do those things that the government requires them to do. So if a government has, if any institution or a government is established and it has the power to compel people and individuals to do what it wants them to do, then we can say that that institution or that government has power. And of course, the reverse is true. If a government does not have the power or authority to compel citizens to do what it wants them to do or what they are supposed to be doing, then we say that that government is not in power, or it does not have the authority over the people, and that's a failed government. So we begin from there. Now, to quite understand clearly what is happening with digital IDs and everything, because when you dig deeper into understanding actually the crafting of digital IDs, is they tell you it's a one-stop shop where you do not need to move around with your national ID, for example. You do not need to move around with your driving license. You do not need to move around with your passport. You do not need to move around with your medical cards. All these things are in one place. Now, the selling point of this is the convenience. But the question then it begs is, at what cost? At what cost is this convenience that I am getting? And it is, for me, of course, the argument has been those that are advancing this whole thing is that, it is convenient. First of all, you don't have to move around with all these things. And then they tell you that, they'll just be captured once. And once they're verified, no one is going to keep this information. And, the funny thing is that, recently, I think at the beginning of this month, there was a story that went around. Of course, it has tried to be, there was an attempt to kill it, of people who had iPhones or Apple gadgets that they updated, and it brought photos that had been permanently deleted from those gadgets. And now one of the ladies, an elderly lady, was complaining, saying she had sold her gadget. She had let go of her gadget, and someone who had it, I think it was a tab, who had it, when they updated the gadget, it brought photos, some that were very intimate photos. And so they reached out to this lady, and these were ordinarily something that the lady thought had permanently deleted and had cleaned the iPad before passing it on. Now you can understand, this is something you thought you had deleted from the gadget, so it's nowhere. But a mere glitch in the system, you can imagine how many people with sensitive information that they thought they had deleted from gadgets that they got rid of is in the hands of another person, a third or fourth person. All over the African market, you hear of UK used, Japan used, Dubai used second-hand gadgets. So when they tell you that, you'll update, they'll tell you bring your birth certificate, your national ID, your passport, your driving license, and all this information, and they tell you it's just going to be capturing it, they're not going to keep it. It's not something that is believable. We had a story of a curator that, the one that they said had sold information to Donald Trump campaign and from Facebook, and they used the information to campaign. And so the problem that we have with all this whole thing, good as it might be, they're trying to make it sound nice and everything. The problem we have it is, one, the credibility of the people that are running this thing. We all know who they are and what their aim is. Like I said at the beginning, power is only relevant, or you're only in power if you're able to compel people to do what you want them to do. Now, you can now juxtapose that definition with what is happening now, and you understand that there are particular people who are asking you to update your information, to put up your information in one place so that they are able to find out exactly what is going on, exactly how they can control you, exactly how they can ask you to do whatever they want you to do. That is what is happening right now. When you look at this whole idea of people having, information that is very sensitive, and the interesting bit, even before we go into the whole idea of thinking that governments will want to control, actually governments largely do not have control over these things. We all know that private players have more stake or have more power or muscle in the tech world. So you have, for example, the whole region of East Africa, and you find that a company like Alphabet, a company like Facebook, Meta, or Twitter, you find that it's wealthier, it's more valuable than the economies of all the East African countries put together. So you'd actually understand that, you have tech giants, exactly what we saw during the COVID era and everything. You have tech giants who are controlling the medical world, and they're telling a doctor a person in tech is telling a doctor that medicine doesn't work, and they're censoring doctors. So we'll have governments are being used right now. Of course, they are being sold the idea that they will be in control of whatever is happening. But the actual truth is they will not be in control because they do not have what it takes. They do not have what it takes to man this whole operation. They do not have what it takes. They don't have the resources. They don't have the skill. They don't have the information. They don't have how to do this whole thing. So you'll have information passed on to another person or another entity, or which are these global tech giants, and they will be the ones controlling. So you can close your eyes and imagine an era or a time where you're not even controlled by your government. It's no longer even your government that is telling you what to do, but it is a tech somewhere in California or whatever it is, whether it's in Russia or China, that is telling you what to do. I'm reminded of the story of how information was moving from the African AU building in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, the IT team realized that at a particular time of the night, there was heavy traffic of data that was moving. And then they tried to find out and realized that the people who had, offered to build this building and everything at a particular hour had made it or bagged it in such a way that all the information on the computers and everything that was in the gadgets that were connected to the servers was being shipped out. So you have a country, one single country, that had offered to build these things and do all these things, collecting all that information, collecting all that data. Where we are headed with this whole thing, even when it comes to the IDs, national IDs that we have in Uganda, you have to understand that we were not ready for this. We had not prepared. And if you want to understand that we were not ready for this, you have to look simply at how the legal framework came in 2 years or so after the national IDs had been issued. So you can imagine you have a country creating national IDs, identity cards for its citizens, but it has no legal framework running this thing, and it comes after. So we do not have the capacity. We do not have what it takes as a nation, or nations, largely most of the nations, to do all these things. Private companies are more advanced in this arena, and I can assure you that they will be in charge of this whole information. So this whole idea is very dangerous for our liberty, to the extent that a single individual person will sit down and decide when it comes, for example, to travel and everything, that you will not leave the country. You see, some of these things are sold as nice. They will tell you offshore banking and all these things, but then they will not tell you that you're doing wrong at the point when you're doing it. But it will come to bite when they want you to do something they want you to do. I'll give you an example to explain what I'm saying. There were accusations that the Speaker of Parliament in Uganda had accounts in some foreign places, had houses, had everything. Do you actually believe that they came to this information at the point when they wanted her to do what they wanted her to do, or at the point where she had done something they don't agree with? They, of course, had this information all along, but they kept quiet, even when they knew that this and this and this and this. So it's the same thing that is going to happen with digital IDs and central bank, because imagine that a central bank for example, the Central Bank of Uganda, let's look at Bank of Uganda. Tell me that Bank of Uganda has the capacity to create a digital currency that is fail-proof, that is so secure, that the global tech companies have nothing, cannot manipulate it in any way. Who really believes that we are ready for such a thing? So you'll have digital IDs, and you'll have individual people that will be able to control everything and decide where nations go, how people behave, of course they say, of course this is the simplest of them all, but of course problematic, if they say, we want you to accept homosexuality. The easiest example you have is the speaker's accounts being frozen in their countries. Now, at least that is hard cash, but they have not stopped her. They cannot stop her money in Uganda, and the banks in Uganda cannot freeze. But now imagine she had all her money in that form, and it's, digital. So they are able to, someone sit somewhere and make you poor overnight with all the money that probably you had, but you have been made poor because you have not played according to how they want you to behave. So it is very problematic that I don't think we are ready for it, first of all, Two, I do not think that the gravity or the disadvantage of this whole idea of digital IDs and central bank digital currency outweighs the advantage of convenience and all these things outweigh the price that we have to pay. The liberty, you have to understand that governments, institutions that hold authority do not find it palatable, do not find it easy, do not find it simple to give away that power. So they are evolving over time to make sure that they curtail more. Because like they say, you give a dictator 1 foot and they will take a kilometer. That's what happens. There are particular institutions that have fashioned themselves, and all their aim is, how can we be in control of the globe? How can we be in control of whatever is happening? And that is where we are headed. So when you give the example of the Tower of Babel, we are being headed there. I do not think that the people agreed and sat in times of Babel and said, let's do this. What we have today is that we have a mastery of some people that have made it in such a way that they know how to trick the biggest masses, the biggest number of the masses, into believing that convenience, that the easy life is the better way to go at the expense of their liberties. So if you come and say this, what is exactly the idea behind the essence behind digital IDs and central bank digital currency? They will tell you, other than convenience, I don't see any other thing, any other reason why someone tells you that you have to have all your information, all your data. Imagine if I had a disagreement with the government, the sitting government, and they are able to just strike out my driving license, my passport. There will be no need even to say I can't leave the country, because they will have my passport ready. They will be able to deny me travel, and they will know where I'm going at any time. They will know what I'm spending my money on. They will be able to say, no, you cannot spend this much. Even taxes, where government will wake up one morning and say, for example, they had put OTT, over the top tax, that we are paying in Uganda for accessing internet. So when they wake up one morning and they say you have to pay OTT, I do not have to even pay it. They will have to deduct it from my bank account because they have access to the money. Of course, they will tell you that, it will be autonomous and you're the only person that can access it and all those stories. But I have given you the story of Apple and iPhones. The story of you delete and it's permanently deleted. But at the end of the day, you see these glitches and you ask yourself, how much more have I been lied to? And then when you wake up, you understand that there is more than meets the eye when they tell you, this is what we are selling. You need to go beyond what they are telling you. This is what we are telling you. This is what we are saying. It will be comfortable. It will be, but at what cost? Because power is for keeping, and they are not about to stop keeping power. And they are working so hard to make sure that, they retain us into a same direction that people will dictate exactly how everything is going to happen. And of course, it is in the light with the woke movement. And they tell you, if you're not woke, if you're not recognizing homosexuality, if you're not recognizing this, if you're not recognizing that, we will impoverish you, we will deplatform you, you will not have access on Twitter, you will not have access on Facebook. Exactly the same playbook. Now imagine you're being denied to speak. The global media, the giant television and print media and radios have their own cartel, of course. They will stop you from speaking. Now social media also stops you from speaking. And now they have impoverished you. They have reached a point where you don't even have paper cash where you can say, I at least have money and I can survive. So you'll be cajoled into doing exactly what was happening at the Tower of Babel, where everyone was building towards their own system and they are trying to defy God and do their own thing. So for liberties, for freedom of the people, this is an idea I would really run away from. And of course, like I said, when you look at Uganda, you cannot actually believe that Uganda can sustain such a project, because even simple things like distributing bicycles, we've had a scandal and scandal over scandal of physical, simple things, distributing bicycles, and we failed. There's a time when Makerere University, for example, was not sure how many students they had. So you can imagine, even now, the numbers that have been released by statistics are questionable of how many people we have. So if we are unable to do the simple things, how do we start thinking that we can issue a digital ID when, the penetration of internet, first of all, in Uganda, before we even go to Africa and look at how things are playing out in Africa, the countries that have advanced are failing at this. And you just have to look at some of these countries and see how people are shunning from the internet, how people are shunning away from leaving a footprint. And you have people saying, let's move into this direction and have all the information about you in one place. So we are able to track what you're buying, what you're spending your money on, how you're earning it, what time you go to sleep, what time you wake up, where you stay, and all this information will be before the government. The legal framework in Uganda, of course, as it is now, forbids some of these things. So it is a step to which you can go. But just a few days back, I heard the Minister of Internal Affairs, General Kaindo Tafire, saying in the next rollout of the national IDs, they want to capture DNA. So that is where we're headed. You can imagine that even in Uganda, they're saying your national ID will have a copy of your DNA so that they know your DNA. Now it goes to a point where even if you've been to a restaurant, we just pick a cup you've been drinking on, and we're able to know that this is Stephen who has been here, or this is Michael, or this is Claire. And it's that unfortunate. We should not allow governments to take over our liberty, our rights, our freedom and privacy, which is enshrined in the Constitution. Because the centralized system is very problematic. That, you know, the saying that goes, do not put all your eggs in one basket. Like I've said, there is no government that has the power in the world, regardless of, whether first world, third world or whatever. There's no government that has, of today, technological advancement more than the private players. So what we are going to have is we are going to have governments that are submitted to private individuals. Even governments themselves, they think they're advancing this to gain more information, but even governments will be submitted to particular individuals who will be in charge of the tech world, because already today, there are particular private players that, like we've been saying, Microsoft gets a hit and, travel. Planes cannot travel, cannot fly. So you'll get to a point where if we go down this road, you have particular individuals, or particularly one individual, that will be able to govern how the whole world behaves, how we are supposed to submit, on how we are supposed to advance in a particular way as they define it. And so, for me, coming from the legal perspective, it is very problematic regarding liberties and rights that are really enshrined in both domestic and international law. But also, from the biblical perspective, this is a crafting that is leading to a one world government. And it is very interesting when you look at how COVID was handled and how it gives you a clear picture of how people and nations that said no to lockdowns were forced, and how, for example, Tanzania took a hit. Everyone was hitting at Tanzania because it had refused lockdowns, because there are particular people that were trying to see, can we actually control the world as it is, and mapped out the loopholes and realized there are countries that are not in their fold and they cannot control them. And so what you're seeing now and the projects that they are pushing post-COVID is to plug those gaps that failed them on how to control the whole world by themselves. But the interesting bit is that, there is a voice out there that is clearly speaking openly, and the voice that is telling us the future, and it's clear. It's very clear. I was very amazed to find out that whatever happened during COVID had been spoken about 2-3 years before it happened. And for example, in Uganda, there's a very interesting video when you go to YouTube and look for Prophet Elvis Mbonye, and look at that prophecy that he gave before the whole lockdown situation. And he was talking about exactly these whole things. For me, even if I was not really biased into the biblical side, and I had encounter with this, because it takes you a chance to just sit down and look at that video with an open mind and exactly understand and see how it played out. Because the good thing is that the footage is there and there are people in there, and you can see exactly how this man predicted what would happen 2 years, and it played out exactly. You saw how the global giants in tech were controlling the narrative in the medical world. It beats my understanding how a person in computers and tech especially is able to censor a doctor who's saying this drug and this drug can work. And a person in tech, because he has a platform and is able to, disseminate their information and stop you from speaking what you're speaking, is able to tell a doctor that no, doctor, this cannot work. And the beauty of this whole thing is that we have had a chance later on, with the benefit of hindsight, to see exactly the mistakes that were done then by these people that were forcing us into a particular line and telling us we have to go into lockdowns, we have to do this, we have to do that. And you understand that what is happening is not about our liberty. It's not about our well-being. It's not about our freedom. It is about particular individuals who are power hungry and want to be the dominant figures, and they want to tell us how to live our lives, how, if we do not accept homosexuality, then we are, as a country, as a nation, because this is not only individual, it's also nationwide. Because if Uganda today is being sanctioned, our leaders are being sanctioned, they're telling you have to leave AGOA, you have to leave this, we are kicking you out of this, we are kicking you out of that. Even the central bank, our central bank itself, will be affected once we are not towing the line of the global world order. You saw what happened with Ukraine and Russia. The countries that were saying we are on the side of Russia were being, harmed, their sanctions and all these things that are happening. It is simply because, there are particular people that are saying we have to have the world moving in a particular direction. And if we implement digital IDs, we implement the central bank digital currency, we will be hit as a nation. Even the countries that are implementing these things will be hit because they do not have the power, they do not have the authority to run these things. We do not have the infrastructure. I think it was Dr. Michael that was saying it. We do not have the infrastructure as nations, especially Africa, and not only Africa, but I'm saying all over the world. The private players, individual players, whether it is X, whether it is Alphabet, whether it is Meta, have advanced technological capacities to control the world. So the perfect example, like I've been saying, and it cannot be overemphasized, is that an outage happens with Microsoft and Uganda cannot fly its plane. The system is synchronized in such a manner that there is a private person, an individual that is controlling the air industry all over the world. So you have these disruptions and everything going on. So for me, I find this very problematic. For those that are interested in the video that I was talking about, just go to YouTube. Just type in Prophet Elvis Mbonye and look for that lockdown COVID prophecy, how it unfolded, because the video is very elaborate. For me, it was astounding when I looked at it, and because at first it's you're dismissive and everything, but when you take time to really open your eyes and see and listen and see what is happening with regards to digital IDs and all these things, then you understand that there is much more to be desired, and we cannot accept. We need to work to take a different line from what Dr. Mike was saying, that we have nothing to do about this. I personally believe that, we can still have technological development and advancement, but our liberties cannot be sacrificed for development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So as we wrap up the discussion, I'll invite one question from the audience. Just one question. You could raise your hand, and also as the panelists prepare to summarize in a minute key takeaways or what they would want to leave the audience with. Okay, so if there is none, I'll invite the panelists to give their takeaways. Ronald Mark, over to you.
In my conclusion or my takeaway, I would strongly stand against the central bank digital currency and digital IDs, because one, we do not have the infrastructure to handle such a project, and even if we did have the infrastructure, there is a lot at stake, and technologies keep on advancing and changing day in, day out. Just with the small glitches that we're having in technology in order to have this particular space. The current owner of X, former Twitter, also had the same technical glitches when he was having a space with Donald Trump. So you can only imagine if with such resources at your disposal, you still have technical challenges. What would happen in our dear land where we wake up and you cannot access any form of money that has value to support you in your day-to-day? how would a nation survive? I stand strongly against us pushing for any digital currency. I stand against us pushing for any digital IDs, because it will take away that one thing that we all have: personal information and privacy. And I would tell any stakeholder to just put themselves in a situation where, in case something goes wrong, what is your plan B? And I also forgot to say that digital currencies do not have, especially central bank digital currencies, they do not have a backing of anything. You see, the value of money has a backing of gold, but digital currencies don't have a backing of anything. So who regulates this fiat cash that we are planning to set up? It would be a very, very high risk that would just widen the gap. Someone might be able to just manipulate the system, and they're able to widen the gap between the rich and the poor. That is my take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald Mark. Yes, Dr. Michael, your key takeaway.
The digital currencies are far-fetched. I don't see us getting there soon, because even the advanced world are looking at 10 to 20 years to attain such thing. So for Uganda, it's really far-fetched because the infrastructure cannot support it at all. But then the digital ID, I have a very strong feeling that our governments are going to push for this, despite the extent to which we do not trust them. The most important thing we need to do as a population and as the people is to stand firm and be able to tell the governments no where we mean a no. And also become civically aware to the extent that we are conscious on the type of people we make our leaders. Because leaders who abuse us, leaders who abuse the authority we entrust to them, is not good at all. So I would think that's the most important thing we need to do at the moment. Organizations like Digital Agenda and the other persons need to strengthen their ability to advocate for respect of the people's authority and building a stronger civically aware population that can stand firm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael. Yes, Mark Asura.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me to be here today. It's very important to understand also that for saying digital ID, we're moving to digital IDs and we're moving to the central bank digital currency. That would mean that we are making internet a must for everyone. And first of all, I do not know if really Uganda is in charge of internet. So you can imagine where you're making your citizens, it's a must for your citizens to be on the internet or to have, these gadgets for them to, though it, like Dr. Michael says, it is far-fetched. But one thing I've realized is that we are stampeded as a country in two things, because history tells us when you look at the economic structure adjustments that were made by the IMF that were dictated on Uganda, and now we are rolling back on some of those things, how we phased out the Uganda Commercial Bank and the Uganda Cooperative Bank, and now we have to set up again the Uganda Development Bank. Some of those ideas, they seem far-fetched, but one thing I've noticed is that we are stampeded sometimes into some of those things, even when we are not really ready. I've told you the legal framework on the national IDs and registration of persons was issued in 2015, but the IDs were issued, I think, in 2012 or before that. So we had about 2 years of the national IDs in physical, people having them, but we had no legal framework because, it had been sold to us as a security thing. But of course, we had people dictating somewhere that, we had to have identification. The other thing you have to know is that identification cannot be overemphasized as well, is about exclusion, majorly. IDs naturally are tools of exclusion, not inclusion. The national IDs, for example, we have a cry of people of Banyarwanda origin who are in Uganda, recognized in the constitution, but cannot be given national IDs, cannot be given passports. It gives you a snapshot of what some of these things will be, that, you can be targeted because now, because of the misunderstandings and everything that was happening between Uganda and Rwanda, you had a particular group of people called Banyarwanda being targeted. They are unable to get national IDs, and because they don't have national IDs, they are not getting passports. Yet, the constitution recognizes a particular group of Banyarwanda as Ugandans. And now those are being told, go and bring your grandmother, go and bring your grandfather if you want to get a national ID. So we have that problem. The other issue that I would like to really conclude with is that, of course, they are telling us everything, that it's optional. They will tell you that, to get a digital ID is optional. But of course, they will continue to persuade people. And as time goes on, it will become mandatory for everyone to be on this platform. Like I've said, governments that implement this are handing over their power. They are handing over their little authority that they had to private players in the tech world. And it is very problematic. If you're a leader out there, it is worth sitting and thinking about. Some of these things, you're persuaded with little money, you're persuaded with small money and incentives here and there, and you pass things that are very critical. But of course, again, I will allude to what one of the speakers said in regard to the leaders that we choose. It is very incumbent upon us to make sure that the leaders we choose are sober enough to understand the consequences, the repercussions, the cost of some of the decisions that they are taking. Because the biggest challenge that we have, if this stopped at government itself, it would be bad enough that that government has all this information, it has all this data on me as an individual, and it can do anything at any given time in total violation of my rights and liberties. But it is grave that even our government will be at the mercy of private players who have technologically advanced mechanism. Because I can assure you that an institution like X, an institution like Meta, or an institution like Alphabet have more power and more resources to cajole the government of Uganda into doing whatever it wants. Now imagine, with all that, you are again handing them over the identification information, the critical information, to the point of handing them DNA information of your citizens. So for me, it is very worrying, more worrying than, of course, the things that preoccupy us, things like corruption and all those things. This is more critical. Yes, corruption is bad and all those things, but we need to pay critical attention to some of these things. And as I conclude, I will again allude to ask anyone out there who wants to really get this from a biblical perspective, or like the host had talked about the Tower of Babel. Log on, just go to YouTube and look for that video that I've talked about of Prophet Elvis Mbonye when he talked about the lockdown, a prophecy about the lockdown. And you'll be shocked, because this was 2 years before it happened. And he talks about how people were working behind the scenes to make sure that the whole world was brought under subjection of particular individuals. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that we really made very good use of your time, whoever is out there listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Over to you, Stephen, in a minute, please.
All right, thank you, moderator. To summarize, I think we have made headway in terms of discussing the pros and cons of all these technologies, and emphasize the role of digital ID in all this in terms of e-governance, healthcare, financial inclusion and services, and everything that all the other panels have touched. So my last comment is the issue of collective accountability, which I have noted that for any government or corporate organizations, tech giants, there is very little to no accountability. And I may as well highlight it with what happened during the lockdowns that's 2 years ago. And these are very good lessons to learn from. Like the previous speaker said, in hindsight, we need to reflect on what is really happening globally. So when you look at, for instance, the big pharma, the control they had over the mainstream media, and they used big tech to censor doctors and medical journals and practitioners and all that. And then the worst case scenario was when they rolled out these vaccine mandates, and then they signed these treaties with governments and signed these, it was Pfizer and Moderna signing contracts with governments. And there was no accountability at all for the vaccine manufacturing companies and for the governments. And they took away the only thing an individual had consent by mandating those vaccines. So where there is no collective accountability, and whenever I see something being rolled out and there is one party with a blanket immunity and no form of being held accountable, and then the other party
is left exposed, then it brings a lot of things to really ponder on. So I support the submissions from previous speakers that civic engagement is very critical. We need to awake the masses, let them understand that when your data is being collected and you're being solicited for consent only at the point of collecting the data, but you're not asked for consent and how it is going to be used, what geographical regions it's going to be used in, the commercialization of your data, and everything else that is attached to that protected health information or private personal identifiable information. So that's very critical, and I would like to thank the hosts and the fellow panelists for this quite enlightening and engaging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Once again, thank you to the panelists. You have really made us knowledgeable on the dangers associated with digital IDs, and I guess to the audience out there, whether you're in a position of decision making or you're next to a decision maker, these are things that you really need to think through, especially from the submissions that have been made around the concerns to do with privacy, concerns to do with the digital divide or some form of socioeconomic inequalities, and also concerns to do with control, at the end of the day, mass surveillance. So thank you very much for joining us once again on this digital agenda platform. And as a platform, we stand on no to digital IDs. So we hope to see you around again next time. Have a good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. Thank you.